The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Volunteering for Professional Growth, offered by the Oregon State University Alumni Association in partnership with Oregon State's Continuing Education Unit. I'm Greg Aronoff, the Marketing and Communications Manager here with Workspace, and I am joined by Yuliya Dennis, who is from the Alumni Association. And we also have Kim Ward, George Long, and Steve Ashley. Welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, before we get started, I'm going to share our agenda for the day. I work for Workspace, which is the non-credit arm of the university. We partner with colleges across campus to offer open enrollment classes to the public on subjects ranging from professional development to gardening to beer making. We're always excited to continue our partnership with Yuliya Dennis from the Alumni Association. I'm sure some of you have joined us for our other webinars on the career series, so we are excited to have you here to talk about volunteering for professional growth. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then we'll go through, and I'll introduce the other speakers as well. So I'm Yuliya Dennis, and thank you for joining our career series webinar on volunteering. And I'm here to support your own professional goals. So if you have things that you're trying to do in your career, feel free to reach out to me, and I serve all of our alumni community with all their career needs. Also, if you want to become a volunteer yourself with our career programs, let me know too. And our volunteers are in a great position because they can both get help from me and volunteer. And many of the career ambassadors that we have end up using our service as well. So it's a wonderful tool for you to use in your own career. So for the webinar, feel free to ask questions anytime, and we'll be addressing questions throughout the conversation here today. There's a chat box that you can use. There will be a link that will be emailed to you afterwards. So if you're not able to catch something, you'll be able to hear it afterwards. And then I want to share very briefly about our alumni career programs. We offer things like this webinar. We also do meetups. We have alumni career ambassadors. We have a LinkedIn group. And then you can also get consultations and resume reviews, etc. So it's a very comprehensive service for alumni. I also support staff development too. So if you're a staff member and you want some support, I've historically done that as well, and I'm open to helping staff members because we're all part of that OSU community. So reach out if you want assistance, and I'm always glad to help people out. So for the webinar today, we're going to really be looking at professional growth from the perspective of volunteering, looking at what would be most helpful for you in your career. And I can say from my own experience, volunteering has had a significant impact on me, and it's also had a significant impact on the presenters we have today. We're going to also assess your goals and learn how volunteering can help you stand out from the crowd. And I'm also going to share some success tips for job searching as well, so that you can really use this as a comprehensive thing to help you with your career. First, I'd like to introduce to you Kim, who's one of our alumni career ambassadors, and she's really great to work with. Kim, I'm going to have you give your introduction to the people here.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks for joining. Kimberly Ward-Borovich here, graduated in 2011 with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. My background is in nonprofit programs and administration, and currently I work at UW-Medicine as a project coordinator. I support the integration of 3 recruiting teams as part of a larger hospital integration project.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim. We're really glad to have you here. Next, I'm going to introduce George, and George is from Portland, and he is someone who has recently gotten involved with career programs, and so I'll turn it over to George.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Long. I'm a graduate from Oregon State from 2005. I'm currently the Assistant Operations Manager for the Portland 911 Center, or the Bureau of Emergency Communications, as we call it. I have been really the crux of why I wanted to talk to everybody is I've been volunteering for about 25 years now in various different programs, mostly related to public safety and emergency services. So I'm looking forward to talking to everybody.
Next, I'll introduce Steve Ashley. He's also one of our alumni career ambassadors. I'm from Arkansas, and he's been involved as pretty recently, but we're glad to have him on the team as well. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Yuliya. Yeah, so I graduated Wood Science Technology in 2011. Jumped straight into working for Georgia Pacific Chemicals as a technical service rep that moved me to Arkansas. I've been down here ever since, currently a technical service project manager, and I've volunteer the Boys and Girls Club, coaching my kids and others, a group leader with our youth ministry, lead community events for foster children, and as Yuliya mentioned, I'm also a career ambassador for the OSU Alumni Association.
Wonderful, thank you. And I just want to say thank you to all three of you for presenting and sharing your knowledge and information with our alumni. Our programs really do depend on volunteers helping us as well with what we do. We have about 60 alumni career ambassadors now. And Greg, looks like we have a question.
We do. We have a question. Is it possible to volunteer with the OSU Alumni Association at CH2M Hill Center?
Absolutely, yes. So actually how I myself started with the Alumni Association is partly through volunteering myself, but as I was exploring what's a good place for me to be, what mission aligns with me, and so there are lots of ways that you can do that. So I would say contact me and then we can figure out what would be the best place. Career programs is a great start because we have so many different things that you can do and the time is really flexible. So it really depends on like what your goal is. And that's the thing about volunteering is, which we'll go into, is what you do really is going to depend on your vision for your future. And the Alumni Association also has lots of volunteering in regions, in Corvallis, across the nation, and especially with career stuff, like we have volunteers in Shanghai and all across the US. So I think it's a wonderful place to volunteer. Looks like we have another question.
So if someone is interested in volunteering at Portland, should they check with you?
Yes, so we have lots and lots of things in Portland as well. Yep, absolutely. Great questions, everybody. Okay, next we're going to turn it over to George, and this is what I was hinting at with like what you volunteer for really depends around this idea of your vision. So I'm going to turn it over to George to talk about your why.
So one of the important things for everybody to keep in mind is why is it that you want to volunteer? And there's a myriad of reasons out there why any of us throw our hat in the ring to volunteer. We raise our hand to do different things. You know, are we volunteering because we want to go have fun with a group? Are we volunteering because we want to support a loved one or a child or something in something they're doing? Or are we looking to volunteer and actually grow as a professional? So it's important to know why you're relating, because then you need to, or why you're volunteering, because then you need to be able to relate that to your end goal. So, you know, from my perspective, I've spent a lot of years volunteering in emergency services, and each time I would volunteer, I had to answer that question. Am I doing this because, you know, when I leave the office for today, doing what I do for a living, I want a place where I can go and unwind? Or am I taking this step to learn a new skill that may not be available to me in my professional career, that I can relate to my professional career, that's going to help me get to the next step? You know, a good example for me is that I spent some time working through the creation and redrafting of policies and procedures in a volunteer aspect during a disaster, and was able to correlate that back into my professional career when I made the jump to supervisor. So when they asked the question, you know, what's your experience in writing policy or having influence on policy and procedure, I could answer the question, you know, hey, I haven't done it here because the opportunity hasn't presented itself, but here's what I've done over here as a volunteer. So looking at what your goals are, find what volunteer opportunities are out there. If your goal is you want to be a manager in a company, or you want to be, an analyst for something, but you're volunteering in areas that aren't related to that, it's going to be tough for professionals to tie those all together and see that the experience is relevant. So if you set up the bake sale last week for the school, but your ultimate goal is you want to, be that analyst that's doing all kinds of mathematical calculations, there's not really a correlation there. So if you're using the volunteer work to advance your professional career, try and marry those up and look for the areas where the skill sets are at that you maybe can't pursue professionally. And then again, take that volunteer work and tie it back to that ultimate goal of what you're trying to achieve.
Excellent points. I couldn't agree more. And I love this idea of looking at your why for volunteering and tying it to your goals. And I think what you said has just, from my perspective, so much truth in it. Next, we're going to turn it over to Kim to talk about focus. That's another area that I think will help you as you're navigating, deciding what is it that you end up doing.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'd like to talk about the importance of your volunteer work and how it needs to be targeted and intentional. So like George mentioned earlier, your why is really a critical input to identifying the focus of your volunteer opportunity, because this kind of volunteering isn't necessarily finding a nonprofit that you support and showing up a few times a month or a couple times a year to help out with their day-to-day tasks. And while that's 100% valid and totally needed, this kind of volunteering is a really focused exercise in career development and can be accomplished with pretty much any business. So it's best to look at this process holistically. You want to start with your goals and figure out what it's going to take to accomplish them. And for this kind of volunteer work, it's important to ask yourself, what are the areas of growth I'd really like to focus on? What skills do I want to practice, and where are the gaps where I am now and where I want to be? And then you can think of the what you have currently in your toolbox, because we all have something to give and everyone has a really unique skill set to share. So those two things will really help you find out kind of what your secret sauce is. What are those ingredients that make up that recipe that is unmistakably you? And knowing that will really inform your search. So for me, a couple of career goals that I have are to continue to build in the project management and process improvement space within healthcare and human resources. And the two ways that I'm doing that right now is I'm a career ambassador for Oregon State Alumni Association, like mentioned earlier. And so for me, this is a great way to continue to build leadership and relationship management skills that are really useful in the world of HR and project management. It's also helped me prepare for my own career moves, and it's connected me to a lot of people that I wouldn't have otherwise met. And I'm really grateful for that. And a lot of the time when I'm helping people, I also get to learn new things as well. So that's a great way to kind of build that skill set too. And at the end of the day, I just really love talking about career development and why people do what they do. So it's a win-win for me there. The second way I'm doing that is I'm facilitating professional development webinars for a process improvement group on LinkedIn. And so I'm leading discussions and coordinating projects for this group. And I get to interact with people who have the experience for the job that I'd like to have a year from now. So it's a great relationship building opportunity, and I'm learning a lot about the industry and how to manage the kind of work that I'm interested in. And that's helped me achieve a pretty great balance, and it's a great resume builder. I'm contributing to causes that are meaningful to me and in the time that I know I can reasonably spend on them. And it's where I know my skill set can add value, but I'm also getting the benefit of learning and adding to my own professional development. And I think it's important to mention that you can do this anytime. You don't have to be looking for a job necessarily, but if you don't have a job and you're looking for a new one, it's a great way to network and skill stack, but it can be just as powerful or even more if you're happily employed. So don't let your current situation hold you back from taking on an opportunity.
Great, thank you, Kim. And then we're also gonna have Kim talk next about the things that you can do to help you grow.
Yes, so naturally the next question is, how do you find the right opportunity or organization? And I think two great resources to use are LinkedIn and professional associations related to your career or industry of choice. So LinkedIn, it's used by so many recruiters and managers and professionals who can help influence your search and career development. And just start with the search bar, put in the industry and topics that you're interested in, and you can filter a few different ways. You can filter by content, so finding ways, it's a good way to find articles and trends in the industry. This can get you connected to the right information, and it's especially helpful if you're volunteer to make a career change. And it's helpful to find companies. So if you don't have your dream companies already figured out, this is a really useful tool to assist in that research. And of course, you can look for people on LinkedIn. So you can search for people with the same job title or a level above, and that can help target your research to who has jobs that are really interesting, and you know, finding out those positions that are available out there that sound just really cool, and how I want to spend my time doing what they're doing. And then also who might have an impact on the hiring decision. So with some savvy LinkedIn searches, you can actually build your own opportunity by doing some research and start talking to people in the industry and company. And you can ask them questions to help guide that conversation and develop those ideas into concrete opportunities that you can facilitate. And so finding out what their challenges are, or what their company faces and what their team faces. And because there's always going to be something that a team or a company consistently struggles with. And sometimes it's just it's a matter of getting a fresh perspective from someone outside of their world. And maybe that's how you plug in. And then finding out their goals for that person professionally, for their team, or for their company overall. And maybe they're nice to haves, the things that they just don't have time for. And what are the things that you already know how to do that can help with those things? And if you can identify that, you can identify how to add value to that company almost instantly, and that's a fantastic way to get noticed. And then the second way is professional associations. Like Yuliya mentioned earlier, a lot of these organizations rely on volunteer work to further their initiatives. So it really is a direct line to industry professionals, and by helping them with events and development and other things like that, it'll give you the chance to show the people who might know about opportunities that aren't even available yet exactly what you're capable of. Because we all know the vast majority of jobs that people get aren't even advertised online. And so you have a very small chance of turning that online application into an interview. And referrals are truly the most effective and efficient way to make really strong career moves. So do your research, stay balanced and intentional about how you spend your time, and that will help you find the right opportunity. But don't hesitate to create your own. There's always a potential of a need out there, and finding that shows that you're able to anticipate needs and add value, and that really highlights your initiative and creativity.
That's really great advice, Kim, and I will definitely second the idea of professional association. So, and if you're thinking of, even if you're moving within your own industry, join the professional association for the industry in the job that you're looking to do, because it's such a great way to network. One thing I recommend to people, especially if you're more introverted, help with like registration for events or something like that, where you just get to be exposed to the people that are there, and then use LinkedIn to connect with people afterwards. It's a really good structured way to increase those connections. And like you said, Kim, most positions are either not posted or they're through some kind of a connection that we have. So I think that if there's any really good key takeaway from this webinar, I think that professional association was a key one. And then we had a question that Greg's going to bring up here.
We do. So this question's fairly specific, but I'll throw it out to the group. And then if you want to touch on the question and then ideas of how to get your foot in the door. So the question is, I've tried with no success to volunteer with OSU Athletics. I've even talked with them on the phone, but I've gotten nowhere other than phone soliciting type positions. So do you know if this is common with the athletic departments due to liability issues? So if the group has thoughts on that, but also the broader context of how do you meet the folks who could get you in the door?
So I'll share something first, and then I'll have everyone. I'll have Kim, Steve, and George all address this question. So I think it's important to know, okay, what do you do when people don't reach out or whatever? So to this person, I say try to do information interviews. So yes, some places, and I don't know, I don't actually know exactly why athletics wouldn't want volunteers, but some places don't. And so use informational interviews. And if you have questions about information interviews, we have webinars on it. You can also contact me, and I'd be glad to walk you through the process, give you templates, give you hints of like what to do, and connect you with some folks. So that's my thing. And then I'll have George address it, then Steve, then Kim. in that order.
Yeah, so speaking to the broader context of that, sometimes there are some places that they can only take certain types of volunteers due to liability or, what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Some organizations use their volunteers for a specific mission that they can't have their paid folks doing all the time, and so it's kind of a force multiplier in that sense. So I think the important part is reaching out to the company or organization that you're trying to talk to and get some firm answers and a follow-up from them as to who's the next person to talk to. So like if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, we want to volunteer, we might have that discussion about what's possible and what's not, but then make sure there's a follow-up that if I'm not the person who can assign that to you, find out from them who it is you need to talk to directly and get them to carry that conversation over.
Go back to what is your why and what are you trying to achieve with volunteering for OSU athletics? It may be taking a step backwards and going in athletics, but in a different area to get a little bit of volunteer work that builds your resume, your volunteer resume, that may stand out, and you may get that recommendation that Kim was talking about. That's one of the biggest things, is getting somebody to speak up on your behalf. And so I would maybe just open up your scope a little bit and try to see what you really want to do and what a good target position would be going forward.
And Kim, how about you?
Yeah, I think that's all fantastic advice. I think the other thing to explore is, is there a way to dig a little deeper on that phone solicitor opportunity? I know it's probably, I say that with a slight hint of caution, don't take an opportunity that's not right for you, but is there a way to pivot that into something that is right for you? And is there a way to, if you're talking to the athletic director already, if you're talking to someone that is strategic and specific, is there a way to kind of suss that out in a creative way that maybe they're not thinking of? I know that in volunteer or in nonprofits that I've coordinated and managed volunteers for before, sometimes it was just a matter of someone saying, actually, I'm really good at, A, and maybe your organization really needs a little bit of A that you didn't even think of. And so having that skill that you can bring to the table might create an opportunity that they don't even think they need. And there you go, value added.
That's great. And Greg, do we have another question as well? No? Okay. Yeah, that's all really good feedback. And thank you to everyone for asking questions too, and keep the questions coming. So we actually have a question for you next. It's a poll question for the audience. Do you currently volunteer somewhere? And so we're just curious, based on who's here, if people are already involved.
All right, as the answers roll in, it looks like the majority, about right now at this point, 60-40, yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is great. And I think that I'm glad it's not 100% because that means we are adding value to those who haven't volunteered yet and giving you broad context. But we're glad that those who have volunteered are here, and then people who've never done it too are here. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Next, we have George, who's going to talk about relating your volunteer work. And I think this is a really great topic and very important because like I was mentioned before, really looking at your goals and your why is going to matter. So George's going to give us information on that.
So this is kind of that look of, okay, I've gone out and I've done volunteer work, and now I'm trying to advance myself professionally, or trying to get hired on in a particular job. And when we go through and we fill out applications and we do our resumes, there's varying ways that those come up. List all full-time work, all part-time work, all volunteer work, however they end up laying out. So that we as somebody, as a hiring manager, has a good full picture of what it is that you've done and what you can contribute. Then when you come in for the interview, a lot of the interview times you're talking about your skills and your experiences and really what you bring to the table, the stuff that maybe isn't reflected on the resume or an application, but now you're going into depth with that. And so the first thing that I've got to get out there is be honest that it's volunteer work. that if I'm speaking to an experience or a skill set that I have, but it came from the volunteer world, it's important that a potential employer or a manager knows this. There, excuse me, there are some differences really in how things function between a paid environment and a volunteer environment. You know, right now I can honestly say that I supervise, as an assistant ops manager, I supervise 16 people, and then under them is about another 120 people. But being paid to volunteer or being paid to supervise those people works differently because there's all kinds of laws around that. You know, pay is involved, schedules, all these other things that maybe as a volunteer, if I'm supervising 20 people, works a little differently if we're meeting twice a week or it's just to help with an event over the weekend. So be honest. Now, being honest doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. In fact, in my line of work, the more honest you can be about something, the better it is, given the amount of public trust that's put into public safety. The other thing too is if you're going to throw it on a resume, and you know you're marking it honestly, you know, I voluntarily did this or I volunteered with this organization, make sure that you're doing the time. You see a lot of folks that will join volunteer organizations, they will join student organizations when they're going to school, just to be a part of it, and that's great. It's a great resume builder. I can build out my resume and there are 5 pages from organizations that I belong to, but when you narrow it down to the ones you've actually contributed to, and you can show that you've done the work and that you've done the work related to the skill or the experience that you're trying to promote to further yourself in your profession or profession you're trying to break into, that's going to stand out rather than this long laundry list of, oh, well, you know, this applicant belonged to all these organizations, but they didn't actually do anything. And that goes for professional organizations as well. You know, it was brought up earlier that a lot of organizations have professional associations with them, and sometimes just by being an employee, you naturally become a member of those associations. But it is the work and the time and the effort that you put in that's going to shine through as the true experience, as the true skill set that builds in. And again, use the relatable skills. You know, if I want to be a mathematical whiz as an analyst, the fact that I ran the bake sale over the weekend probably is not going to relate. But in my line of work, what I see a lot of is folks that have worked in call centers. They understand customer service. They understand talking to upset people on the phone. You have amateur radio operators who understand how the radio works, how we talk to each other. They can relate those skills during an interview, and it's something that we as an employer can understand. So it's important to make sure that they're relatable, not just cannon fodder, if you will, of, hey, look, I did all this volunteer work, look how great I am, even though it really doesn't necessarily in the end mean anything to the potential employer.
Great, thank you so much, George. And we do have a question that Greg's going to ask.
We do. So the question is, how much is too much when it comes to leading volunteerism teams? So can you talk about sort of the delicate balance of the work-life balance of volunteering, but then you have other commitments as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. There is certainly a work-life balance, and if you include the volunteer work in there, there's a work volunteer life balance that goes into that as well. Something that was said to me a long time ago and has always stuck with me that I'll share here that I think is important is volunteering is great to, you know, for personal reasons, for professional reasons, but don't go so overboard that you start neglecting your family, you start neglecting other interests that help you unwind, and certainly don't start volunteering so much that it starts impacting your career. You never want to do so much that the impression is, well, I'm working just to get money because really what I want to do is what I'm doing over in the volunteer world. So you need to strike that balance between, you know, enjoying your time as a volunteer and getting something out of it, but also spending time with those who are important to you and making sure that work understands that they're a priority as well. I can tell you that there's been plenty of times throughout the years that I've volunteered where I've actually had to back out of commitments or not commit to something because I needed to put work first, or I needed to put my wife and kid first, or I needed to put another family member first. So it's striking that balance. Don't get yourself so deep and so involved where you become the one volunteer person everybody turns to, because once that happens, it's tough to get out of that.
Yeah, I think
And
you're
to
spot
your
on with
point,
that one, and that's a really, I think I second all of those points. So we have a poll question next, which is looking at your motivation. So for those of you who are volunteering, what is, well, actually, this is for everybody. What is your driving motivation for being part of this webinar and for wanting to learn about these things?
The answers are starting to come in, and it looks like developing leadership skills. Well, they're across the board. Right now, developing leadership skills is the winner, followed by connecting with community, and followed by networking and meeting new people.
That's great. And what's interesting to me is like right now, all of my volunteering, they all fit in that bucket as well. So I can relate to what everyone is saying. And that's really good information to know. So we are going to have Steve talk next, and I think this one is really important. So we're going to talk about remote working. So we did do a webinar last year, or it was late early summer about working from home and telecommuting. More and more people are telecommuting. And so what does this mean for our social life, our connections, et cetera? And I think Steve has a really great perspective, and I really appreciate him sharing this with all of us today. So I'll give Steve the floor now to talk about that.
so I think this is perfect coming off of that last poll question where people are wanting to connect with the community and or giving back. And like Yuliya said, the workforce is continuing to increase as being remote or even just off-site. So you don't have that atmosphere of a office that you go into and interact with people all the time. Your company may not be in the city that you're in, so you don't have a community connection there. And that's the one thing that I miss the most, being a remote worker, is a sense of being a part of the community. So I find myself searching for ways to connect. And when I do that, I want to be able to also, my family needs to be connected to that community as well. So like I had mentioned, I've coached all my kids at the Boys and Girls Club, all the way from soccer in kindergarten to basketball in 7th grade. And the interactions that you have not only with your own kids, but all the kids within the community, you end up, being called coach, or you're recognized randomly walking through a school as, hey, you coached me one season, and they still remember you. And so those kind of connections are meaningful to me. So the other thing that I've tried to do is with my wife and I, connecting as a couple to the community. We have been very active in the foster community, and this is a big need in our county. So we had started a back to school supply drive for foster kids, where they're supplied backpacks, all the supplies they need for their school, and first day of school outfits, and as well as they're at Christmas time, helping to provide gifts to those kids as well, where it's not a burden on the family. That the extra income or money that needs to be spent on foster kids is now taken, and a part of the community pays for that. We get people to sponsor kids and get them items. But those are big things that we do. But the one thing that you guys had kind of talked about was networking as well. And so when you get into these different areas, whether it's with the kids, whether it's with the foster, or with our youth ministry, we start meeting different people throughout the community. You don't know whether it's going to be a banker, whether it's going to be Edward Jones investor, a doctor, a dentist. You're going to get connected to the community by volunteering. And it's not, you can be intentional upon that, but no matter what you do, when you start getting into the community of volunteering, you're going to start meeting and networking. So you don't know whether you meet your next boss or somebody that you may even want to try to get hired on. So that to me, we always talk about social media and those connections, but the face-to-face connections that you make by volunteering within your community far outweigh those that you can get by just liking somebody's picture or post. So that's my biggest thing, is to get that face-to-face connection within your community.
That's great. I totally agree. And that face-to-face really does create that sense of community. And then Steve's going to also share how to make it more effective in general. And I think this is also something that's good to keep in mind as you're really taking a holistic view. Okay, what does it mean to be a volunteer, and how can I increase my just my life through this avenue?
So this one really builds on two slides that we've already had, is what your why is and what your focus is. It's now to utilize that time to be productive in reaching your why in your focused area. And it's not just volunteering to volunteer. Have a purpose behind it. You can volunteer for hours on end and not accomplish very much for your group or even to better yourself. So when you do this, you want to, like everybody else has said, figure out what your focus is and drive towards that. One of the greatest things about volunteering is you can develop your skill set. You look at your strengths and weaknesses, you can easily jump into a volunteer role in something that you know you're good at. But if you want to work on one of your weaknesses to better yourself in a job position that you want or you're even currently in, this is a great opportunity to do that. If you are looking to develop leadership skills or management skills, this is the chance where you can speak up and say, hey, I'd like to take that role on and roll that project out and lead it. In the other side, you could be a manager or leader and you want to take a step back, and it kind of grounds you if you take a step back and take a different role and work on something that you need to better yourself on, whether it's being patient or even just kind of opening yourself up to listen to others. I know that you can get in a rut of always being in charge of something, and sometimes you need to step back from that. The developing the networks and leadership skills, we talked about the networking and the different people that you can meet. But this is a great real life LinkedIn opportunity when you start volunteering. You will develop and showcase your resume to many people just by interacting and working together for a common goal. And it's not one that people are there because they're getting paid. It's because they want to make a difference and do something better. So meeting key people within your community goes a long way, and you just need to be out there and put your best foot forward and be effective in that time.
That's great. Thank you. And we have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. So when you guys are looking at volunteering opportunities, how do you know if it's a good fit for you? And conversely, are there any red flags that you want to be mindful of? And I'll put that out to the whole group.
Yeah, and then we'll have George share first, then Kim, then Steve. So George, go ahead and answer first.
So I think when you asked that question, the first thing that came to mind was the one red flag that always jumps out at me is when you go to look for a volunteer opportunity and the organization says, hey, we want you on board, we want you doing these things, and you suddenly come to the realization that they're wanting to put enough work on you that you could potentially be a paid full-time employee with that group. That happens sometimes. Sometimes we get excited when somebody comes in the door, wants to help, wants to volunteer, and we go, great, here's the workload I can't do, see what you can do with that. And that's always a red flag for me, and that goes back to that work-life balance thing that, if I'm coming into it to work on something specific or get a certain experience, do I really want to tackle, this 2 or 3 times the amount of work just to be a part of the organization? Is really a good fit for me, or is this going to become the overwhelming thing in my life?
That's great. I really like that advice. Kim, how about you? What's your advice for that question?
Yeah, I think that that's so true, and it's so easy to find opportunities like that. I think the nuance that I would add to that is never never accept a mission critical opportunity. Like if it's on you, and that's, advice to people who try to find volunteers too. But a lot of times those, if you're contributing to something that is really just so integral to their mission or their goals for that year, it's probably good to just take a step back and see how you can shift it to something a little more reasonable. But that's a red flag that I would look out for.
That's good advice as well. Steve, how about you? What's your advice on this question?
So one other thing I would look at is terms of your volunteering. If if you get into a position, can you get out of it, or is it something that they're going to put you just in and you are, the main person, like Kim just kind of said, you are the one to get it done. You got to feel those out a little bit, because you could definitely get into a position in a corner where you don't want to back out because you don't want to let people down, but at the same time, it may just have overloaded you and you were not expecting that.
Yeah, and I will second what all of you said. And in my perspective, when I see or hear that that's the case, then it generally is a sign that the organization is unhealthy. And you do want to be part of an organization that's healthy and thriving, because as a volunteer, that organization is not your responsibility. And so being part of a healthy organization is going to help you be a healthy volunteer. So and that's on us. We have to take the responsibility to determine not only mission, but is the organization equipped enough to handle a volunteer in a way that's really respectful to the volunteer. So I love what everyone said. It's fantastic. We have another poll question for all of you. And the poll question is especially to those who have volunteered before, currently volunteering, is where do you volunteer? And if you're not volunteering now, where have you volunteered in the past?
So this one is, are you planning on volunteering or moving forward?
Oh, actually, I think we were going to ask that one later. Oh. But I think for this one, we were going to maybe have people just type in an answer. So could we, oh, it looks like, well, we'll just do both at the same time. We'll just roll with it. So we'll go ahead and do the, are you planning volunteer move forward? And Greg can give the response for that.
Yeah, that's great. So it looks like 100% are planning on volunteering moving forward.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, so we'll address. So that one was going to be in the future. We'll address that one later. I think we're going to do an open-ended question where people could comment in the comments about where do you currently volunteer, if you do, or where have you volunteered in the past. So go ahead and just type that into the chat box, and then Greg's going to read those off for us.
Yes, I can read them as they come in. So far, we have Girl Scouts. And if you have any specific volunteering ideas of where you plan on volunteering, you can just put them in the chat box.
And we'll give them about a minute to just get those in. All right, any other submissions? All right. Well, so some ideas if you're pondering and thinking, okay, where? So we gave some ideas. So professional associations. You can do like universities or colleges or schools. You can do really any nonprofit work is a good opportunity to volunteer. And if you're trying to go into an industry and trying to build up your skills and you're not sure where to volunteer, you can also reach out to me. I can help you think about like how to approach it. The other thing that you can do is in your information reviews, you can ask people where do they volunteer and find out if there's good fits for you as well for future things. All right, so we'll go ahead and keep moving forward. The next section that we're going to be talking about is professional growth. So looking at how does this all tie to the broader context of your profession and your career goals. And I think that especially if you're looking at skills you want to develop, most of most of or much of the time when I see people moving up in their careers, it's not necessarily the things that they're doing in their current job or in their current position description. It's really things that they're doing extra that are very targeted and that help them develop their skills or that help them develop their network. And so what I'd recommend you do is, let's say you have a goal and your goal is a certain kind of job. Then the first thing I would do is reach out to people who are in that profession and say, hey, what is it like? What do you do? And then follow up, how does someone get into your profession? And so developing that network that way is really good. And you can ask people directly, hey, are you part of any professional associations? Do you volunteer anywhere? What do you recommend to someone who's interested in being in that industry or in that role? So that's a good way to start. And then you can also use LinkedIn. You can look at to see, okay, what are the things that people are involved in? And so when I was looking to switch into alumni career services, I didn't have experience in it. I didn't know where to look. So I used people I knew and people on LinkedIn to find out any and all professional associations that would help me gain those skills. And a lot of times they have workshops, they have webinars, they also have conferences. And if it's a local conference especially and you can volunteer at it, that's a really wonderful way to move forward. And I want to talk briefly also about career goals in general. And so looks like we have a question though before we move forward with that.
Yes, actually, folks have put in where they plan on volunteering.
Wonderful.
So let me just read them. So we have Girl Scouts, the Portland Marathon, First Baptist Church Eugene, Medical Teams International, Rescue Mission Habitat for Humanity, and that's it for now.
Wonderful. So I think one of the things that this shows is just the diversity of the opportunities that are available and what people are interested in. And I think that even just hearing that list, one gets a glimpse into some of the things that a person's interested in or where they might go in their career. And so really the world's your oyster when it comes to volunteering. And I want to talk about career goals in general. So what are best practices? I think anyone who's ever listened to any of my webinars and any of our webinars knows that meeting people is a thing that I stress the most. And so we know that resumes and applying online does not work. For a very small number of people it does, but for most people it doesn't. 75 to 90% of jobs are through connections, and those connections are much easier made through information reviews or through volunteering or through professional associations. The other thing is, think of it as like your holistic life. So most of the time, if someone's going to hire someone on their team, they're going to hire the person who really is eager about life and is enthusiastic and cares about the mission, but also is someone who is just excited about life and what they're doing in general. And so your volunteering might meet different needs. Some of it might be for career. Some of it might just be for life stuff. So like my volunteering examples are, I volunteer with a few professional associations. One is in my field and I'm on their board, and I oversee a mentorship program, and that hits so many of my career goals. But then I also volunteer as a dishwasher for Stone Soup. So that doesn't necessarily meet my career goal, but it allows me to engage in my community. And it makes me very excited to do something interesting outside of work. And so then I get to bring that excitement back into the office because I'm like, yeah, like I'm doing interesting things, meeting interesting people, doing something that's completely different than what I typically do. And so I think that all contributes to our sense of being connected to other people. And that definitely helps with your job. And I think that the other thing to think of career goals is, okay, so take a position description for an ideal job you want to have. Make a mind map, outline what does it take to get that job? Like what kind of skills do you need? For example, maybe budget skills are needed. So like for this job, I needed budget skills and I didn't have them. So I joined the Parks and Rec board and was on their budget team. So not only did it hit my value of protecting our parks and the environment and being a good contributor to our local network of opportunities for outdoor activities, but I also got to do budget stuff. And I was really upfront with them, like, this is what I want. I want budget stuff and help the parks. And so there's so many awesome things you can do to build those skills, and you can use the mind map to figure out what those gaps are. So that's a little overview for that. And then we had the poll question, but we answered that already. And then Greg, there's another question that came in.
We do have a question, so I'll throw it out to the group if anyone has experience. And the question is, does any of the panelists have experience volunteering in healthcare, like hospitals or clinics?
I actually do, interestingly enough, and I learned that I didn't want to be in healthcare. So in high school, I was one of those candy striper people, and I learned that I didn't want to be in healthcare for a variety of reasons. So I'll throw my experience out there, and then, well, Kim or George or Steve, any of you have healthcare experience?
I do work in healthcare, but I'm not super familiar with the volunteering aspect as much, but I do know it's definitely something that happens quite a bit. And all of our medical centers have a volunteer page, but that's not, I know that's not super direct and targeted, but that's what I do know is out there.
Great, thank you. George or Steve, do you know?
You know, I've got experience, not personally in like hospitals or clinics, but in my line of work, we deal with a lot of volunteer fire agencies, volunteer emergency medical services personnel. And I can tell you that the skill sets there and the trust and responsibility placed in those volunteers is certainly transferable to a lot of different places that I've seen them go. Really, the closest I've come to beyond that, I actually have also volunteered with Medical Teams International, and I spent a few weeks in Cambodia as an emergency medical services dispatch advisor. So certainly where I come from, while I haven't touched it directly, I certainly see the skills transferring and the experiences transferring over.
Great, thank you, everyone. So we're going to keep moving forward. So we did have we were going to ask a poll question, but we're going to skip that since we already answered that. And then we're going to actually, we're ready now for the summary. And I'll have Kim do her summary points, then George, then Steve. And then we'll give you an overview of what we talked about. So Kim, take it away.
Okay, great. Perfect. I think my number one takeaway is to find a way to turn your volunteer work into a referral by adding value to a company or cause.
That's a really good one. George, how about you?
I've got two. Just a reminder that, you know, make sure you're being honest about your volunteer work. When I sit back and I look at my career and trying to shift into a different area, I professionally have a very specific skill set. So I don't want to encourage anybody to walk into an interview or put on their resume something that makes their volunteer work look like it was something it wasn't. Just state what it is, and the skills and experiences will speak for themselves. The other thing I wanted to touch on is we've talked a lot about networking, and again, the networking through professional organizations, professionally, volunteer, what have you. It works both ways. I have used my networking or my network both in the volunteer realm and in the professional realm. And more times than not, I'll meet somebody when I'm volunteering and I'll reach back out to them from a professional standpoint. So it really casts a large web in your network. So it's certainly worth doing and staying in touch with those that you meet.
That's great, thank you. Steve, how about you?
Mine is you can volunteer to help others, but don't forget how you can better yourself at the same time. And that is not a selfish statement. That is just part of what you're doing and why you're doing it. You can go into something wanting to give the most to help others, but you always need to be thinking about yourself. You know, we talked about volunteer life balance and all of that. So just keep that in mind as you go out there to do good things.
That's great. Yeah, very wise advice. So for next steps, do feel free to join our LinkedIn groups. We have one for OSU Alumni staff and students, and then we also have one for international OSU Alumni staff and students. So join us there. And then you can message me one takeaway from the webinar, and you can be entered to win a free career consultation with me. So it's a really great and wonderful service that's available to you. And if you have questions, whether it be about volunteering or your career growth, or you want to get in touch with one of the ambassadors or something, reach out to me, and I'm always here and available to assist you. And then I'll turn it over to Greg for some last words. And really, I want to express also a huge thank you to the presenters and to Greg for joining us for the webinar today and delivering great content.
Thank you so much, Yuliya, Kim, George, and Steve. That was great. I did want to provide just a little bit of information. I talked about professional and continuing education here at OSU. And the reason we like to partner with the Alumni Association and hear from our alumni is because we're often able to connect with the very widespread OSU network throughout not only the state of Oregon, but the US and beyond. And we can help provide educational opportunities for personal enrichment and professional development. Each program we offer is designed for working professionals with convenient online classes and year-round start dates. We also offer customized team training. And again, I want to thank Yuliya, Kim, George, and Steve. We really appreciate having you here, and that was great, and you delivered a ton of great content. And with that, I will wrap it up and say thank you so much.
Thank you.